Are you able to see my?
Perfect.
Okay, yeah. First of all, thank you, Anna, for this opportunity, right? So I'm very happy to see everyone here. So very good morning and good afternoon for the Germany team, right? So today I'm going to cover the prompts, right? So I think prompts as an observable and policy enforcing control planes for AI, right? So now these year are like a AI era, right? So in this AI world, so prompts are our key partner to getting the answers in fingertip, right? If that is the case, how we can control this prompt in a better way, right? So this is just from the site reliability and the platform engineering and AI standpoint, I would like to present this talk. And before I get into this talk, right, so let me give you some introduction about me. So I'm the member of the Google Developer Expert. So I have around 20 plus years of experience in SRE and digital transformation. So my entire experience in developing automation and all things is related to the SRE and platform engineering so far. My passion is to write good blogs. So whenever I find any good technical articles, right, I used to break down into a layman terms, and I will try to publish some good articles so that everyone will understand. So that is my passion. So from that standpoint, every week or bi-weekly, whenever time permits, right, so I used to write some blogs or articles, and you can definitely get all the latest update from my end with respect to this field through my LinkedIn. So I gave the links in the chat window also, so please feel to follow me and post this session, right? So in case if you have any additional queries or hey, I want some help in setting my environment or whatever the thing, right, so please ping me in LinkedIn. So whenever we have some time, right, so we will connect. So I'm open to volunteer and help you to get the learnings going, right? So that is where this community comes into picture, right? So we are here to help each other since AI is booming on everyday basis. Even I don't know certain things, right? So I can learn from you, and also you can learn from me, right? So that is very important to keep moving ourselves and learning ourselves to this technology trend, right? So with that in place, so I will go to the next slide. So this is my short agenda today. So my agenda, I just split it into 5 categories. I always do this because to make more simpler, and I want all the end audience to get the core idea of what is this presentation about. And I will give you a small demo, right, so that you will understand and apply these PPT slides into that one. And at the end of the session, right, so you will know something about the policy, agent, and control, right? It is not something like we can talk and go, right? So I don't like these type of things, but I will give you some small demo so that will make you understand better, like how we can make this policy in a controlled way, and you can able to control in your day-to-day application, right? So with that in place, my first agenda is the random shift. So I will explain the probability of what we did earlier and what is the current LLM world, right? So how we are dealing it. So that part I will do. And the second one is the prompt control plane, right? So this is where I would like to focus more. So how we can control the prompt, right? So that is where we will touch in the second agenda. And the third one, how we can put this prompt, right? So in a code and policy and the infrastructure way, right? So that part I will cover. And fourth is very important for all the SRE and the platform engineers, right? So how we can get the insights of the plants, right? Whenever you are typing something, right, how is really getting into the infrastructure and how you are getting the output, right? So that is very important to understand. So I will cover that part also. And the last one, with a policy enforcement architecture, right? So if you are designing your application, right, so how you can frame this into your application, right? So what is the tips and tricks? So I will share that one. And at last, I will give one small demo so that you will understand this connecting dots together at the end of the session, right? So with that in place, so I will go to agenda 1 now. So before I get into agenda 1, right, so because from the audience standpoint, if you already know like what is prompt, and if you already used LLM or who do not use LLM, but I like to start from the beginner standpoint, right? So let's take one simple example. So now everyone is using chat GPT or LLM or something, right? So whenever you are opening a chat GPT, right, you are typing something in the chat GPT, right? So from that standpoint, whenever you are putting your input in the sense the keyboard, whatever you are typing, right, so that is the input text in the LLM world. So they are calling that input text as prompt, right? For example, you are opening a chat GPT and asking like, hey, what is the current time in my country, right? So that particular line, we are calling it as the prompt, right? So connect that one so that you will able to understand the entire presentation, right? So that the key input from the end user to the LLM in the sense, in this example, I'm talking about the chat GPT, right? So because everyone knows this, chat GPT, you are typing the input text, so that is called prompt, right? So from that standpoint, so I'm going to cover all these slides so that you can put that into your picture, right? Okay, so before that, right, so the point one I mentioned is the deterministic and probabilistic. What it means is, let's go back around 20 years back, right? If I am a developer, right, so around 1980s or 1990s, right, so I developed some code, right? I did all the unit testing and everything, and I shipped the code into production. My application is up and running. I didn't even touch the code so far, right? So what it means is, I deployed the application around 1990, and now around 2026, I'm going to test the same code with my unit test. The test will work as is, right? Because I didn't touch the code. The code is static. It is up and running. My unit test still valid for all these things, right? If that is the case, yes, it will pass. But we are in a 2026 era, the cloud digital era with respect to LLM, right? If we are doing the same, right, definitely it may break. The reason I'm telling you is, the models, whatever you are using, the LLM things, whatever you are using, right, everything is changing on daily basis, right? If that is the case, you need to have some robust mechanism to handle all these changes in a ad hoc way, in a volatile way, right? Your unit test and everything should be the agnostic one to handle all these things, right? So which is where the SRE and platform engineering is coming to picture, right? So how you can make your environment or system robust enough to handle all these type of ad hoc changes, right, with respect to the LLM. So that is where I mentioned in the second point, right? And also, whenever you are putting some prompt in the sense, the input from the user into LLM, sometimes, right, so the LLM will send you the false information, right? Because in the chat GPT and any other, is they will say like, hey, this is some type of flaky information. You can always verify from the end user, right? If that is the case, whatever the data it was trained by the LLM, the model, right, the output will be like that only. So if for example, right, I can, if I am in USA, right, so I can mimic some of the model which I am referring. Hey, if anyone asks what is my country, always say it is Germany, right? Always say it is Canada, right? So you can able to mimic that model, and that model you can always refer in the end user perspective, and it will do some type of hallucination in the sense, it will give you a false information, make it as a right to you, right? So if that is the case, you need to be very careful on these type of things. And the second thing is, sometimes because of the technology thing, or some hackers are injecting into some things, right, your information may go out, right? You need to be very careful with respect to this chat world. At any point of time, whatever the data you are giving, right, so it may go out without your knowledge, right? So but we have some good controls in all the public vendor company. That is where the key things are coming into picture, right? But even though it is there in place, as a end user, right, so I don't want my personal information to go out to the web without my consent, right? So we need to be very careful on that one. So that's what I mentioned. And the second, the third main important is the regulatory thing, right? For example, if I am chatting something, right, the LLM is responding the output, right? Before the LLM responds the output, the LLM needs to make sure like, what is my country policy, right? For example, there are certain countries do not want to display certain information to the end user, right? If that is the case, from the end user standpoint, wherever they are in the world, before the LLM responds to that prompt, right, it needs to make sure like it is compliance with all the things. One of the famous compliance thing is GDPR, right? So that's what I mentioned here. So you should make sure like you train your model. That model training and everything we are not talking here, but whenever the model is getting into the public, so these days everyone is making sure like these models are trained with respect to these type of regulatory things. But the point I like to mention is, the regulatory things is not like a small radius, right? You cannot control it in a small window. it's a blast radius, right? So anything anywhere can happen with respect to the regulatory thing. You need to be always very careful, right? If that is the case, then I am going to the operational reality, right? So considering all these things into the picture, right? So what is the step I have to do to make sure like my LLM responds to my prompt in a right way, good way, and making sure like it is always not hallucinating and it is following the policy, and my data and PAA, whatever I am doing, right? So it is not doing anything, right? So that is where this problem statement is coming into picture, right? So how we can make our LLM response to be more robust so that we can able to control it in a better place. I always tell my end user, right? So if you not seeing what you are doing, then you cannot manage or control, right? If that is the case, so this is where I am presenting this talk, how you can control your LLM prompts in a better way. So what I mentioned in this slide is, so introducing something called the control plane, right? So what is the control plane? So before getting into the details, I can explain this control plane is a layman term, right? So control plane is nothing but a middleware. Middleware in the sense you are sending an input in a chat GPT, and the chat GPT is giving you an output, right? It will take couple of 20 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever, right? So if that is the case, in between that 20 or 30 seconds, something is happening inside that chat GPT engine, right? So that is where we need to put the control plane, right? So that is where everything is coming into the picture. That is the layer called control plane layer. If you see this window, right? So I mentioned, let's consider this is the chat GPT, right? So and the user is typing something, so it will go to the control plane, and the control plane will give all the response, and the end user will see the output. But inside the control plane, right? So what are the key pillars, right? The pillars in the sense of what you can do better with respect to the control plane. So that's what I mentioned here. We have few extra things also, but to make this topic very simpler, right? So I just mentioned only 4 things. One thing is the policy engine, another one is the router, another one is the template registry, another one is the telemetry, right? So to start with, we can go for policy engine. Policy engine is nothing but whenever you are trying to ask LLM, right? So you can always instruct the LLM, hey, don't give this information for the end user, right? For example, if any end user is asking or hey, what is the person X credit number or whatever the thing, right? If that is the case, do not entertain and say like, sorry, I do not give this information. So those type of policies you can always define in the control plane. And also the control plane has a robust enough or intelligence to route the logic, right? So for example, these days many models are coming into the picture, right? So we have OpenAI, Anthropic, Llama, Gemini, or whatever maybe, right? So some models are very good in responding some type of prompts, right? For example, if I'm giving a prompt, right? So maybe OpenAI is very good in respond to that prompt. The reason is it may be trained with a good data from that perspective, right? So if Gemini is good in other ways. So depending upon that, if I know like, hey, this model is very good enough to handle this one, right? I am putting my mathematical queries always in my prompt. If that is the case, okay, mathematics models are very good in Llama, so route my logic to Llama so that I will get a better response every time. So you can control all these things with respect to the control plane. And the third thing is the template registry, right? So right? So whenever you are typing something now in ChatGPT, you will get some output at the same time, right? So if you are typing some other thing, the same text, if you are typing after 10 minutes, you may get different output, right? Depending upon the time and the logic and whatever the LLM reacts that time, right? So that your input format and output format and always vary sometimes. So how you can control all these things, right? That is where this template registry is coming into picture. And you can always define the LLM model like, hey, whatever the user typing, right? So you want to give that answer in a simpler tabular format, right? Or for example, if I am asking some information, right, you can always compare that information to the previous information and always put a variance and color coding and a table format, right? You can always define those type of instructions to the LM. That is coming under template registry. And telemetry is nothing but observability, right? So whenever we are doing any type of model parameters or model deployment, right, we need to make sure like how my model reacts, right? Reacting in the sense, what is the latency of the model, right? So whether my model is performing as expected, or anywhere anything the bottleneck is happening, right? As I said, right, so as a user, I'm typing something, after 30 to 40 seconds I'm getting the output, good, right? If my output is not coming as expected, I'm expecting the output in 30 seconds, right? But this model is giving me after 2 minutes, because we are in a digital era, we have no time to wait to respond to all these things, right? If that is the case, the site reliability engineer is coming into the picture, and he will detect like, hey, where is the bottleneck, why it is happening. Sometimes it may happen at the model level itself, right? Sometimes between the model and the screen, whatever, it may happen, right? So anywhere anything can happen in the LLM world. So if that is the case, you need to get all the things from the token is nothing but whenever the user is giving the information, each and every keyword in that prompt is called token. So you need to consider that also. In the live example, I will show you what token and why it is very important, and all. You can able to control all these settings in your LLM execution. If that is the case, you need to have a better mechanism of understanding like, hey, what the user is giving, why it is not responding, where is the latency, where is the bottleneck, if I want to improve something, where I have to go, right? So these are all the things you will understand using the telemetry. With these four pillars, right, using a control plane, you will get a full control of your LLM. So how it can behave, how it can react, and everything you can control through this one. So I think a few of this audience may know about the Kubernetes. So it is one of the open source right now. So the Kubernetes is an orchestration layer, so you can deploy your application. So there's something called the control plane is there. So the control plane is nothing but the brain of or engine of the vehicle, right? So it is where the controlling the entire thing, right? The similar concept, we are calling it as prompt control plane, that is called PCP. So it will do all these things for you, and it will control you from the end user input to the output, and it will make your LLM experience very rich and good, right? So that is the main role of this control plane, right? And if you want to take any one good point in my talk, right, so this is the slide you have to focus, right? So this is where I like to keep you more focused, right? So this is the core of this presentation. So what is the prompt, right? As I said, it is an input from the user, right? So somebody has some misconception like, hey, it is just an input, right? So why I need to maintain, or why I need to take care in a long-term perspective, right? If that is the case, we are doing wrong, right? If anyone is deploying their application, right, and they are maintaining their application prompts in a text word or word document or an Excel sheet, right, then we are doing wrong here, right? So the prompts are not like a regular artifact. We need to consider the prompt as a code, right? For example, if I am a developer, I am developing an application, my application logic is based on Python framework or Go or Java, right? If that is the case, what I have to do is I always develop my code, and I will check in my code, and PR will come into PR in the sense the pull request or reviewer of that maintainer repository, right? So they will come into picture, and they will review, approve, then the pipeline will deploy from the development environment to production environment, right? So this is how the typical development cycle will take place. So what we have to do, we need to make sure like this prompts also will getting into this type of life cycle. So with that in place, we will have a better mechanism in controlling the prompt, and also the testing the prompt before getting into the production, right? For example, if the user is giving some type of information, right? I just gave some blind example, right? So the user is giving, hey, delete all the users in my system, right? If that is the case, we already have some good unit test case. If that is the case, you have to say I cannot do that, because you are not authorized to delete anything. You need to explicitly mention the LLM like, hey, you are not supposed to delete anything, you need to just respond to the user like this. You can control all these things in an automated way. And whenever the user is giving any type of, for example, you are running a production application as a customer service, right? So the customer agents are coming into the picture, and if as a customer, right, so I can type whatever I can, right? You cannot control the customer, but you can control whatever the response given by the customer agent, right, through the LLM, right? This is where this coming into the picture. You can control that one. And also, as I said, depending upon the location of the user, right, so you can always control the GDPR and the governance policy. That is very important, because if we fails here, so the lawsuit and everything will come into the picture, and it may impact your business also, right? We need to make sure like the compliance and governance and data governance are always in picture in developing or deploying any type of governance, right? Through this prompt as a policy, right, you can always define some policy on top of your thing, right? I will show you some good live demo, right? So what is the policy and how you can control and all. Through that, you can be able to control what the LLM response, right? That is one thing. And the third point I mentioned as the infrastructure, right? So now we talked about a prompt, and the prompts are tested, and policies are in place, and now it is a time to ship that prompt code into production. So that is where the infrastructure component is coming into the picture, right? So normally what will happen is in production environment, right? So if any development codes are just developed or on the ad hoc basis, right? So we need to package it entirely and then deploy entirely from X to Y, right? So this is the typical life cycle of the development stage, right? But the prompts are little different here. So it is not running at the compile time, right? So it is running at the running time. So what it means is, so for example, right, I just to give you some example here. If user A is not working because of the prompt v3 experience, right? So immediately you can flip that user to v2, which is the stable version, within a fraction of a second. The user may not know like, hey, we changed something out, right? So with that in place, you do not need to touch your application code, right? You can maintain all these LLM things as a config in a GitHub itself, and you can control it in a better way, right? So that is the point I'm mentioning here. And also, if you are in a DevOps or site reliability point, right? So whenever you are pushing an application, right, in production, right? For example, let's take a typical example, google.com, right? Everyone across the world try to access the google.com at least once in their day, right? Because they want to know something, what's happening and everything, right? Let's assume like if google.com is going down for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, right? So if that is the case, the Google is making billions of dollars loss, right? If that is the case, no business wants this model, right? What we can do is we want to make sure like we are putting the latest patches into the environment. At the same time, the environment should not go and or go down with respect to the end user, right? So if that is the case, what we can do, right? So there is a concept called canary deployment. So whenever I have a new changes are coming, only a particular set of users I can route the traffic to the new and observe it and see like what's happening. If it is everything is good as expected, my testing is good, then I can put the similar route traffic to the 90% of the user, right? Before I put my fix into 100% user and see everyone getting impacted or getting panic, I can choose only 1% or 0.1 users, right? Only 100 users, right? If it breaks, then we can fix it easily for that 100 user, or I can revert, right? This is one of the SRE concept, the canary deployment, but it is easy to handle all these things with respect to this prompt as an infrastructure thing, right? So that is the thing. And going to the next one, right? As I said, the observability part, right? So now, because of this LLM and all other things, right? So what we are doing here is whenever, so let's take one typical example, right? So I deployed an application. The user clicked the application. After 2 minutes, the response is coming, right? In between the click and the response, right? So that is called the latency, right? The latency is nothing but the period start, period end in getting the output, right? If an application performance is really good, right, which means the latency should be low. That is the online statement. But with respect to the LLM, right, so how we can define this latency, right? You always see all the documentation as TTFT, which is time to first token, right? So whenever the user is putting any type of input, right? So what is the system? How long it is taking the token to consider and getting the output? So that is the time period for TTF. So you need to consider that always in order to improve your LLM, right? That is what I mentioned. The second thing is the token, right? So depending upon the token, the vendor may charge you little different. For example, right? Let's take one simple example, the Google Cloud, right? So the Google Cloud may charge $1 for every 100 tokens, right? If that is the case, if you are querying for your testing purpose and you always put your token as 100, what it means is every time you query for your testing, it will charge you $1, and you will pay more bill, right? You can control it better right now. So what it means is you can control the token. Hey, I want only one token to be output every time, right? Because if I put 100 tokens, I will pay $100. If I put one token, I will pay $1. So if for the testing purpose, you can always save your economics. So that is where I mentioned. So there is a concept to save your input token, how much the LLM needs to respond, right? So that is what it's very important. And I will show you in the live demo also how you can control all these things. And the third point is the metrics, right? So you can always needs to collect the metrics, right? If something, because LLM is nothing but you cannot predict anything, right? So if you are typing something, the end user cannot predict like, hey, this is what I'm going to get, right? Sometimes yes, but sometimes because of the problematic or mathematical reason, right? Because everything is trained on the data model, and the data model may have a vast set of data, and sometimes the data may not looks good, sometimes it may be sideward or hallucination may come. If that is the case, you need to make sure like you are getting that failure percentage. Then you can take that failure percentage and train your model again and again to make sure like it is 100% robust enough to handle all the scenario, right? If that is the case, you need to make sure like the quality metrics are there in place as part of this observability. Yes, we need to capture all these things, right? The second point what I mentioned is the prompt, right? So if you see any logs, right? So whenever you are deploying an LLM application, so there is an option to enable the debug log, right? If you set like, hey, config equal to debug, so what it means is it will log each and everything the LLM is taking care behind the scene, right? So if you want to try something interesting after this meeting, so you can always deploy the code, whatever I mentioned in the live demo, right? I gave the GitHub link also. You can copy paste and execute, and during that execution you can always put your debug equal to on. So it will show you the bunch of things, right? So for each and everything you need to understand from the end user perspective, it is very difficult, right? So you never know, like because it puts lot of logics and algorithms sometimes, right? It is very confusing. So what you can do is you can always make sure like the LLM putting the log in a right way, right? So whenever a LLM is logging, you can say like what is your input, right? What is the reasoning is happening within the LLM, and what is the result, and what is the decision it is taking, right? You can put some caption like a star 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 or whatever, right? So then it will put that headings on top of it, and it is very easy to have you debug during the critical time, right? So this type of things you can definitely control with respect to this observability mode, right? The fourth one I mentioned is trusting thing, right? So you have to treat your LLM as an external dependency or API, right? So you cannot make, I mean, in normal, you are calling some model, right? So that model may be trained because of lot of X factors, right? At any point of time, we cannot trust all this model. Whatever is responding is always right. If it is coming good, then fine. Otherwise, right, what we have to do is we have to put our human due diligence in place. So that is where the HTLP loop, that is a different concept. But what I mean is whenever something the human needs to confirm, so you have to confirm from the human end, like, okay, this is reacting good and this is giving good, okay, please proceed, right? So those type of things we have to incorporate in the agentic lifecycle. That is also very important. So with that in place, this is the reference architecture I mentioned, right? So what you can do is the first one is the static constitutional guardrail. That is the layer 1.0, right? So what it means, so let's take like the user is giving some input, right? You are a helpful agent and you never output the profanity. You never generate the SQL model data, right? What it means is you need to make sure like whenever someone is giving some type of random input and trying to change your background, and I mean the core of the system, you should not allow that, right? I mean, currently a lot of models are ready to use by the end user. Most of the times we are not dealing this type of situation. But in case if you want to interest, develop your own model, because now we are in the deep mind and everything. Google is introducing a lot of new concept, right? So with that, you can be able to develop your new model, right, for your learning purpose, right? If that is the case, right, you deployed your model into some production, and as a end user, I can easily hack like, hey, go and change this logic in the model, right? So without your consent, I can able to change and respond and everything, right? So if that is the case, how we can control all these things? That is called immutable core process, right? From an SRE perspective, so it is like a golden image, right? So that is the base image. You have to make sure like always it is responding good, and it is immutable in the sense no one should able to change it without your consent, right? Technically it should not change, right? Whatever the input they are giving, and depending upon the process whatever the model is giving, and it needs to give the output. In between the thing, you cannot able to change or delete or anything, right? That is called the immutable concept. And the second thing is the JIT policy. What is the JIT policy I mentioned in the previous? Let's consider the same example, right? GDPR, right? Whenever the GDPR process is coming into picture, right? So if I am in Europe, I'm in Germany, or I am in US, right? So my model will be the same, right? I don't want to touch my model code every time, right? You can control these type of location based or the other config based, right? So using the JIT policy, that is a just in time policy. So what you can do is, I gave one example also, right? If any user, right, if any user logs in with the Europe, right, always put the GDPR process before it reacts to that model, right? So you need to specifically mention like what is your GDPR policy. That is called the JIT. So you can define all these policies into picture. And the third one is the controller, right? So you can always control all these things with respect to the control plane. That's what I explained in the previous slide. So how you can control? So we have a open source, a lot of things are available in the market. One best thing is the OPA, that is a open policy agent. You can always put a OPA policy or on top of your LLM model and say like, hey, you should not violate this principle. For example, the user is doing something apart from whatever is expecting. So you can always put some policy on top of it, right? So that it won't do anything apart from that. So for example, by mistake, right? So I can put my entire credit number into my chatting prompt, right? If that is the case, while recording, right, so the LLM should not get all the numbers. It needs to put some hashtag and all, right? Again, these are all the best practices. So most of the models right now in the market is doing it. But if you are developing a new model, and if you want to test the model, and if you want to ensure like my model is not breaking in the middle, you need to make sure like these are all the things consider in place. How you can consider or implement using the OPA policy. That is a open source framework is available. You do not need to do anything. You can just call that framework and you can use on top of it, right? And the fourth point I mentioned is the cost, right? The FinOps is very important with respect to the LLM, because nowadays we are also seeing the ChatGPT itself, right? So they are having a subscription model, right? So if you are a pro thing, they will give more tokens. If you are a normal user, they are giving a less token. What it means is, for normal user, they will support only 100 tokens. Token in the sense keyword per day, right? If you are a pro user, they will give you 500 tokens per day, right? But for the pro user, you have to pay, right? So how you want to pay? Why you want to pay? Because whenever you are putting your token in the sense the keyword into the LLM prompts, right? In the back end, it will go and do the processing in some compute in the sense some type of the storage layer, right? So that is where they are charging all the monies from us. So you need to make sure like whatever the model you are trying to call, right? For example, you are developing an application, right? For your application, you need to architecturally think like what type of model I want to use. For example, in Llama itself, 2 billion tokens it is able to support, right? I don't want 2 billion token for this one. I pay $100 for this, my testing, right? My testing is very simple. If that is the case, in Google Gemini, we have a Flash models are available. It is very cheap and it will support your requirement. If that is the case, in your application code, just call that Gemini model, right? So depending upon the business logic, whatever you are building, you need to always consider the FinOps things also in place, so that you can make sure like your cost of the application is going always lower, right? So the lower the cost, you can increase the revenue if the application is working good, right? So that is the concept I mentioned here. And this is one of the reference architecture I mentioned, right? So if you are considering all these things into your thing, so what are all the things you can do, right? So your always have a gateway. So the gateway in the sense the control plane, right? And also you need to put your registry in place. Registry in the sense of the prompt things and always things should be there, and the policy engines, right? So whatever the policy, I will show you a simple example. So that will explain you like what is the policy and all of the thing, right? With that in place, this is your infrastructure block. And from the data plane, from the observability standpoint, right, you always needs to put your traces, logs, and FinOps board in place, because if anything happens, right, so if anything goes sideways, you need to make sure like what is happening behind the scene. You need to get the full visibility from end to end, how my traces, right? For example, if from the time period X to Y it is taking more than Y to Z, right? If that is the case, the traces you need to make sure like you are capturing it. And also the logs also, which is these days, as I said, right, so the LLM is generating a large logs. So if you put all the logs into one place, so that will cost you a lot, right? So if that is the case, how smart you can do is you can export the required logs into some type of analytical DB. For example, I mentioned as BigQuery, right? So BigQuery is one of the analytical engine, right? So you can always export the log and save the log there, right? When considering the other databases and everything, that if you are saving the logs in BigQuery, so they will cost you a little bit, but it is very minimal. And also the beauty of BigQuery from Google is it will give you the analytical information, right? So within 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you will get a full insight. So now the Google BigQuery is grown a lot. Technically, they are giving a lot of capabilities. If that is the case, simply you can route your logs, whatever the needed log, to the BigQuery, and you can get the insights easily, right? So that is also possible. And I just mentioned the reference lifecycle, right? So first of all, it will go from ingress and intercept and hydrate, and the routing logic will come into place, and inference, how the model generating the response, right? So that is one thing. And always validate. And once everything, the point 1 to point 2 to 6 completed, and egress in the sense what is the output it is sending to the user. This is one of the reference architecture I mentioned for our team. And before I get into the QA thing, right, so I would like to give a small demo so that you will understand like what it means, right? So after the demo, I will take a question and answer. Okay. So for this demo, I'm using the Google Cloud, right? So I hope you are seeing my screen, right? So once you are going to the Google Cloud, right, so you will always go and select the project, right? So in this case, I selected my project as this is my personal account, and I selected my project as GLC, right? So this I created long back, right? Once you selected your project, so this is your playground environment, right? So you can launch all the services from Google from this environment, and it is restricted only to this project, and this project is tagged to the billing account. So whatever is coming, it will coming only from this project. In that way, you can have a better control to see what's going on with respect to your environment, right? It is always possible. So the first step for this demo, what I'm going to do is there is a prompt is available, a shell script is available, right? There are other ways also to connect from the Google Cloud. So, but I don't want to complicate the things. So in Google Cloud itself, using the web console, you can able to connect all the terminal in fingertips, right? So that is where I mentioned. So once you click this button, right? So this is the button here. Once you click the button will show you the GLI the terminals and all other thing, right? So it will be your root folder, right? So if you see here, so this is my ID and this is your root folder, right? If that is the case, before for this thing, right, so the prerequisite step you have to do, right? Whenever you are executing some program or something, right, you always make sure like something should be there as a config prior to that one, right? So for that, what you need to do is you need to make sure like in Google Cloud environment, you will always enable the AI platform in the sense the Google infrastructure component with respect to the AI, right? It is one of the API, right? So it's a prerequisite for anything you do in Google. And it is not only for Google, every cloud vendor has their own thing. It's very simple to enable using the UI also you can do for the simplicity, right? So I'm just using the command prompt, right? The G Cloud is the standard word. Whatever the command you are using in Google Cloud, you need to say like G Cloud, then services, then enable, then give this enable thing, right? So once you do this, what will happen is it will enable all the things. Since my environment is already enabled, I'm not seeing any output. If that is not the case, it will install and it will say like, hey, successfully installed, right? This is the first step you have to do. And also, right, so you, because in Google Cloud we have multiple regions, so whenever you are executing, you need to specifically mention the AI, like, hey, I belongs to this region. For example, for this demo, I just give a central one is my region, right? If that is the case, I just mentioned is, hey, I updated my property, my region as central one, right? The next thing you have to do is you have to install the requirements of AI, right? It's very simple in Google, right? So all you need is the pip is the package manager by default, right? So this shell script will has in everything, right? So you do not need to worry anything, right? You just copy paste these three prompts. I mean, prompts in the sense of commands, and then just hit enter. It will do the magic on its own. That is the beauty of the Google Cloud and the this type of inbuilt shell thing, right? So from the end user machine, if you want to execute, you have to do some type of additional things, but Google is taking care of everything for you, right? So if that is the case, through this package manager, I want to ensure like this package is always there, right? So once you install, and it will say all the things dependencies are there, then you are done, right? So you are ready to go to the demo, right? So now I'm clearing my screen. So let's see, like, so for this demo, right, I already created a folder, right? The folder name is Alan 26 demo. So I'm just going into this folder. Then I created already one sample Python script. Right? So this is where I'm trying to execute. So what I can do is, the another beauty of Google Cloud is you can open the file in the editor, right? So you can just open and navigate and whatever you want in the editor, right? So let's say like I have open folder. Right. So as I said, I created a folder called LN26 demo, and I created this file. So this is my sample POC file, right? So this is not a rocket science code, but for the demo purpose, I just made it very simple, right? What I am calling is the Vertex AI. The Vertex AI is one of the key things Google is offering now to all end users. So it is giving you the out-of-box capabilities to make your AI experience very good, right? So yeah, I can share some documentation on the Vertex AI after this demo, but you can always use the Vertex AI to do your LLM prompt or development or whatever may be, right? So it will make your life very easy. Google is giving a very good infrastructure with respect to this one. So what I'm doing is I'm initiating my Vertex AI. Right? It is nothing but some type of a virtual box. Then I'm calling the model. So this is where I'm telling, right? So the model is nothing but, so now for this demo, I can just use the Gemini 2.5 Flash model, which is a very low cost, or sometimes they are giving a free of tire offer also, right? Yeah, I don't want to call the Llama model, which is of 2 billion for this POC purpose. Sometimes they may charge also, right? I don't want to get into that trap. So for this this one, since I am using the Google Cloud, so they are giving the free thing. So I'm using this model. So then I put the policy here, right? So what is the policy? Let's take some example, right? So user prompt, right? So this is where the user is going to give, hey, explain Kubernetes secret best practices, right? This is what the user is going to do. And I just put some policy, right? The beginner policy, right? Hey, explain like a beginner, use the simple word, use the analogies, and avoid jargons. What it means is, even though the 10th standard grade or 5th standard grade is seeing this, they can able to understand the output. So this is where you can control the output of the LLM. That is very important. And the second policy I mentioned, right? So only provide the enterprise grade advice, and avoid the speculations, right? And don't put any even the facts, and the best practice. And if if you're not sure, just say not sure, right? So let's see, like I put two policies, one for the beginner and another one for the enterprise. And let's see like how this reacts, right? So then in order to execute it, it's very simple. So go to the terminal, and since it is a Python program, I'm just calling as Python, right? Let's see like what it is doing. So it is trying to execute that code, right? So then it is giving you the output. If you see here, right? So I hope you are able to see my screen. So let me maximize this, right? If you are seeing my screen, right? So the first response for this question is very simple, and it took around 2.67, right, seconds. So what it is doing is explain like a beginner, right? So if anyone is asking, hey, what is the Kubernetes best practice? because of this policy whatever I defined, so it is telling like, hey, imagine you are a big and busy city where sometimes, so it is not something like the user can able to understand. It is very simple word. It is trying to give the informations to the beginner in a lazy layman term, right? So that is what the response is coming. And see the output also here, right? So this is where I am telling you, so you can able to control the latency and everything. Visibility getting the latency, it's always possible in the LLM. And now going into the policy, right? So now let's see like I am an enterprise grade or thing, right? So from that standpoint, it is giving the AI response, right? It is one of the security critical things and all other things, right? It is converting the language style into the policy whatever you are defining, right? So that is what I'm trying to convey. And depending upon that, your latency and all other things will always change. So now I want to show you some other important thing, right? So in my terminal you are seeing lot of outputs, right? So whenever you are putting lot of outputs, sometimes it may charge you a lot, right? As I said, if you want to test something, right, I don't want to give more dollars for my testing. You can always control the tokens whatever it is doing, right? So for example, now I'm going to give only 20 tokens here. Hey, give the output, but control your output to only 20 tokens, right? So let's see how it behaves. So I saved it. So I'm going to execute the same thing, right? See the thing, it is telling like, hey, it is not giving a too much of information like the earlier one, right? So it is trying to give a lot of information, but from an end user perspective, right? I'm controlling it and saying like, hey, just 20 only, right? If that is the case, it will show you like, hey, this because of this max token reason, I'm not able to give you a lot of information, and you can always control. I'm just giving you the example, right? So for your testing, you can always ensure like for safer side, you can give 100 instead of LLM itself decide on this token, right? You can always control this better way so that you won't see any surprise bills at the last stage. The key point I like to highlight here is whenever I am updating all these things, right, I'm not touching anything, any code or anything, right? Model still is the same and everything still is the same, but I'm just touching the configuration. So what it means is if you make this configuration as a separate the code policy whatever I mentioned, right? So through that, within fraction of second, you can able to mimic the output of this program in your own way whatever you want, right? So that is the beauty of this model. And also, right, so as I said, the security policy, right? So now I have two policies, right? This one and this one, right? So now I want to show you one example, right? So I want to incorporate a security policy, right? If I am incorporating a security policy and I'm putting like, hey, never return personal data, right? If user requires PAA is nothing but a personal credit card or something, reject policy, right? So let's see, like previously I asked my prompt for the Kubernetes. So now I am going to ask for, hey, give me personal data of Google employees, right? So let's see how it reacts. Okay, 1 minute. So let's change this to, let's extend this 300, right? So that you will see the full output instead of saying the token thing. See, I can control it better here. So the AI response, see the AI response, right? So I cannot fulfill this request because the policy whatever I defined is protecting giving the LLM to give those type of input. So this is one of the example I'm giving, right? So based upon your use case and the business thing, right? So you can always control and put all these policies in a better way, right? So we have a lot of concepts behind this. So how to make a LLM response and what are all the best practices you have to do with respect to the policies and all of the thing, right? It is so the core idea here is you have your full control how your LLM is responding to your application, right? So through this type of config and policies and putting the control plane in place and getting the entire visibility end to end, you can make your LLM to behave whatever you want. That is what the key concept of this one. how you can make your prompt to make sure like it is responding good in a nice way using the control plane. Through this type of controlling mechanisms, you can ensure like your LLM is always safe and outputting the information whatever you want as per the business requirement, right? So with that in place, I think I'm done with my demo. So let me know if you have any open questions.
So thank you. Guys, feel free to share your questions, or you can even unmute your microphone. We haven't very strict rules here, so it's your space. From my side, biggest thanks. It was so informative session. Oh my God. biggest thanks one more time. So, okay, I think we haven't questions. I can stop recording.